Hey everybody, Ed Baker here. Today I'm going to show you how to correctly composite glassware in Photoshop using transparencies. We're going to start with this wine glass right here, and we're going to take it and composite it onto this gray wood background. Now, one of the advantages of this technique over the other techniques that are out there is that we will keep all the individual elements of the glass intact, and we'll be able to easily use the same glass on a variety of different backgrounds with little or no editing. And even if we need to, we have all the pieces so we can just tweak them as needed. Another advantage of this technique is that there's little or no painting. Basically none, really. You can use a mouse for it. You don't need a tablet or anything special, and that just makes everything a whole lot easier. And you can use it on just about any type of glassware. So let's get started. Okay, so now I've got the glass open in Photoshop, and the first thing we need to do is to clip it out. Now, the quick and easy way that most people clip out objects in Photoshop is to grab the magic wand tool and just click here somewhere in the white, which seems to give us a pretty good selection. But if we go into a quick mask mode and then look in really close to the edge of the glass, we're going to see that it's not quite so clean and is actually really noisy. Now, if we try to use this selection as a mask, we're going to totally give away the fact that we're compositing a glass in Photoshop, and it's not going to really keep everything nice and clean like we need it to. So we're going to zoom back out here and get rid of our selection. Now, what we're going to use in this case is we're going to use a path to clip out the glass. And to create a path, we go into our Paths palette, click New Path, and then use the Path tool using the P to select it. We're going to come in and then just kind of hit the main spots of the glass to clip it out. Now, I'm not going to clip out the whole glass because I've already done that, and creating paths is, the subject of another tutorial, but basically get your main points here, and then we come here and click between them and then pull it out, and we get a nice little edge here, adding and refining as we need to. I personally don't like to pull the handles too much. I find it makes things a little bit more difficult, but just to get between them and then pull them out, which ends up with a much better and cleaner selection than we had with just using the magic wand. Now, some people might say that the edge is too sharp, but that's not going to be a problem because we will soften it when we need to later on. But for right now, we need to have everything nice and crisp in order to make it work. Once we've clipped out our glass, we're going to have to separate it into 4 different layers and add a ground shadow in order to correctly composite in Photoshop. Now, if I go ahead and show this a finished glass here, I can show you all the pieces. First, of course, is the shadow underneath the glass, which is this layer here. And then next we have our edges of the glass, the fill of the glass, and then we have our highlights. Now, the highlights may be a little hard to see here, so I'll put it on a black background. You can see them a little bit better. And these we'll put on top of the glass, which will help sell the curvature and put it back into the scene. Then at the end, we might need to add a little bit of edge enhancement, and this will help give it a little bit more, darken the edges a little bit, just to sell the shape a little bit better. So we will go back, and now we'll hide our finished glass and start with our clipped out glass. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to take our clipped out wine glass and we want to convert it to a smart object. The reason we're doing this is that will make the layer mask part of the object, but still keep it intact if we ever want to go back and edit it later. We want to keep everything as non-destructive as possible, and using the eraser tool is really just a big no-no. The only time you want to use that is if you're doing digital painting. So now that we've got our layer, we're going to go ahead and duplicate it to give us a backup and put that underneath our other layers. Now, this next step is going to seem a little counterintuitive at first, but trust me, it works. We're going to apply 2 different layer styles to our wine glass. First thing we're going to do is we're going to do a color overlay. And for the overlay, we're going to choose solid black, which will give us a nice black wine glass. The next thing we want to do is we want to put an inner glow on the object. Now here you can see I've already got it set. Normal is the opacity is pretty much up there, and then the size is pretty high as well. And click OK. Now that we have these layer styles, we are going to then now create layers from them, which will make clipped layers down to the glass. And now we're going to remove or release the clipping mask, which will give us a white background with the black glass. Take the two of them together, merge the layers together by Control or Command E. Now we're going to invert them. And now we see a nice little mask. So hit Control or Command A to select all, Control or Command C to copy, and go in the channels layer. Add a new alpha channel, and then hit Control or Command V to paste it into that alpha channel. This is going to give us a mask to use on the glass itself. Next, we're going to Control or Command click the alpha channel to make a selection from that alpha channel, and come back here, hide our layer, show our other channels back as well. And we are going to make a new layer mask on the glass. And as you can see, it hid the edges, so we need to invert it back again, sorry. So now we've got our edges of our glass visible. Now here in the middle, we can still see some stuff coming through it, but we're going to fix that in a minute once we have our other layers done. Now we're going to duplicate this layer again, and we are going to destroy or get rid of the layer mask. And we have this. We'll go back to our path tool now, and we're going to select the wine, which I've already made the path for the wine, and highlight. Make a control click that to make a selection, and make, of course, another layer mask. Ooh, I forgot to hide something here for a step later on. So now we have our wine. So we've got our edges and our wine. Now to make our next layer, we're going to duplicate the wine layer again. And this one's going to be for our highlights, but we're going to get rid of the layer mask first. Now, in order to get our highlights, we want to get rid of all this color information, so we're going to add an adjustment layer, and that will be black and white. And that looks pretty good, but this is going to affect the entire, any layer beneath it. So instead of masking it out or clipping it, we're going to go ahead and combine these two and make it into, ta-da, a smart object again. Now once it gets done, there we go. Now once we have our color info, it will still show up, so I'll do that. Now we're going to go into the layer styles and blending options, but we're going to use it different than people tend to normally. We're going to bring our blacks way up, and you're going to start to see them coming apart here. Use our Option key or Alt key to bring the top layer all the way up to the pretty much the very end of the whites. Get that about like that. That looks okay. And to show you what this looks like, I'll show the black background here. And that's looking pretty good. But we want to change it from normal though. We're going to change it from normal to lighten. That's going to change things a little bit better once we add our other objects underneath it. So let's get this going on here. Okay, now you can see we actually have transparency coming through the top of the wine glass, but still retaining our highlights. And we need to adjust that just a tiny bit. Let's bring this top one down, not that one, the black. The black, where's the black? A little closer, okay, a little bit of value. Okay, so next we need to add some transparency to the wine, and the way we're going to start doing that is to convert the wine layer to, you got it, a smart object. This will, of course, embed our layer mask into the wine object itself. So what we're going to do then is we're going to add yet another layer mask on top of it, but instead of actually clipping out any kind of shape or filling in any pixels, we're just going to go ahead and fill that mask layer with black, and that's of course going to make all the wine disappear. But in order to change that, we're going to double click on the mask layer, which will give us these options here, the properties, and we're going to take the density and start pulling it down, and what's going to happen is the wine is going to start showing back up as we pull the density down. Okay, so we've got some transparency, and that way we can also control we can separate the density of the wine versus the clear part of the glass, which of course would have a different transparency than the wine itself. Now what the density is doing is that it's actually pulling down the black value to this gray over here, which means no matter how much you fill this layer mask, it's never going to go beyond this layer of gray. So you could sit there and paint on it all day long, and it's not going to get any more transparent unless you bring the density back up to here. So we'll bring this down here to somewhere like this, which looks good, I think, right there. Maybe a little bit more. Okay, all right, that's pretty good to go so far. All right, now let's look at what we got going on here. Zoom out a little bit. All right, so we've got our wine, and it's let's get that a little bit more opaque. Okay, we've got our wine with its own transparency. We've got our glass with its own transparency, and we've got these highlights over here. Now, you may notice that down here in the stem, we've got everything just kind of coming a little bit too transparent. So we'll come back down here to the edges, and we'll highlight our layer mask. Oh, wait, sorry. First, we want to control click on our wine glass to make sure we're not painting outside of that. And we'll come into our layer mask on this. Now, I'm actually using a pen at this point, but you really don't need one. So come over and get our brush tool, and we'll set our size up a little bit better, bigger. And soften up the edges a little bit. Okay, so we want to bring our opacity down and our flow down, just so we're not applying everything all at once. And change white to our active color, and then just start doing a little bit of painting here. Just clip it out to make our glass a little bit more opaque where we need it to be. We want to have a little bit showing through, but not too much. Okay, I think that looks good. Control D, deselect. And that is it for the painting. See, told you, almost none. And you can do it with the mouse. Okay, so now we've got our wine glass. Now the last step that we need to do, let's go ahead and take all of these objects, or these layers here, and Control G or Command G to group them into our glass. And beneath that, make a new layer, change its blending mode to multiply. Come here and make a elliptical marquee selection, and roughly get our shape underneath here, and then fill with black. Now, what you do then normally is just come up here and apply a Gaussian blur filter, but first we're going to convert it yet again to a smart object. Now, the reason why we're doing that on the ground shadow is because we want to keep our blurs editable so we can mess with them. And I'm going to apply two different effects. I'm going to apply first, I'm going to do a motion blur, and we're going to make this exactly horizontal. You can see here it's blurring out the edges, because usually when you have a front-on view of a glass, you have a little bit of more shadow coming off the sides than you do off the front and back. So that looks pretty good. And then next we're going to apply a good old-fashioned Gaussian blur, and we'll bring that radius up some. Which might be a bit much. It's not too bad. Okay, bring our opacity down, and then also another thing you can do too is you can adjust the shape if you want. And then the effects will apply to them, and you can just keep on tweaking this until you find something you like. Okay, and also we've got a little bit going on up there, so we will collapse our effects and add a layer mask and start painting away the parts that we don't want. And sometimes also the drop shadow show through the bottom of the glass, so you might want to get rid of some of that as well. And there we go. Yeah, it's a little down and dirty, but all right, that's good. So here we pretty much have our finished glass. Now we can also take this and put it on a different background here or here or here. And then what's great about this technique, like I said earlier, is that you can take any of these layers and then come back in and tweak them. Let's put this on the green background. Come back in here and then tweak them to make them work in your scene. So this one, we're going to bring this black up a little bit more. And that's going to get a little bit more transparency through the top of the glass. And then of course you can bring it down just a tad to get that highlight back. Now also, if you got this one has a little bit of a halo going on that, so we'll go into our edges on the layer mask of the edges here, and then you can bring and hit the mask edge tool. We will show on layers so we can see what's actually happening, and then just start shifting our edge in just a little bit if we need to. Okay, and there we pretty much have our glass done, and you can see here it's still looking a little bit transparent. So we will go ahead and control click to get the glass selection again, and then just paint a little bit more. Oops. Till we find something that we're happy with. Like I said, we want to have a little bit coming through, but not too much to where it's making it look unrealistic. All right. There we go. And now we have a perfectly composited glass on the background. Now, sometimes also you might notice, like on this black background or this red background, or the white background rather, this edge is kind of disappearing a little bit. So it's a real easy fix. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get a selection again from our path layer, and we're going to add a new layer above this. So we're going to call edge darken, and we're going to fill it with any color. Doesn't really matter because we're going to hide the fill anyway. Take our fill all the way down here, but then we're going to apply a layer style of satin. Now satin's going to look a little funky at first. So we're going to invert it, and now you see it's going top to bottom like this. We're going to take it all the way from left to right, and we're going to bring that distance way down. Your defaults may be different from mine, so bring the size down just to where we get this little bit of a sharper edge here. Click OK. I think that's fairly good. Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right. And of course, you can always just tweak this a little bit if you need to. Change blending mode to multiply. And we are done. So we've gone from, I don't have the original glass anymore. Oh, wait, I know where it is. I saved it down here. I'm gonna bring our backup up here. So we've gone from this glass to this glass. Now there's one last thing we can do to sell the image. Of course, naturally, glass tends to refract things that are around it, and here you can see the glass is not actually bending anything. So what we will do is we will make our selection of just the glass itself. Now this one doesn't have to be quite as precise. We'll go in here to the wine glass here and just control click that, and we'll go into the quick mask, and then we can even come, we can come down here, just make a marquee selection, and just fill it with black and zoom in a little bit and brush it out real quick. It doesn't have to be precise. It's mostly just to make sure that it doesn't go outside the edges of the glass. So, all right, we've made our selection. Come back out here. Okay, we'll come down to our background. Now this part you have to have your glass in its final location before you make it. So we'll come here to our wood. We'll duplicate that, and we will rasterize the background. Now this part, like I always said, you want to make everything non-destructive, but there's just no real way to do this one. So we'll make it a new background. We'll add a layer mask. Then we will apply that layer mask, which will give us just this little section here. Now we do want to keep this editable, so we go ahead and convert that to a smart object yet again, because transformations can be stored with smart objects. Now hit Control or Command T to get our selection here, and we'll go up here and select the warp mode, and then just pull our points a little bit to get a little bit of bending in the glass. It's going to bend a little bit further inside of the wine than it is going to in the glassware, but not by much. We make sure we're following the contours of the glass as well. A little bit out here. We don't want to make it too much because then it'll look crazy and not like a real wine glass. We want to just get just a little bit of bending so we can get the idea that the glass is actually warping the light as it goes through it. Okay, that looks pretty good. We'll hit Enter or just hit Return to apply the transformation. And then we will get our mask again and apply it to get anything, or add a mask layer back to that warped layer so we don't have anything outside the glass. And here we are. Here's our final glass. And we can go from, we went from here to here. And then this glass can be used, like I mentioned earlier, on this background, or on this background, or on this background, and pretty much any background you want. And if you want to go back and edit something, say like in this case, the shadow is a bit too strong, we just come here and lower our opacity to where it's not quite so prevalent. And there you go. Now there are two final steps you can take to really help your glass composite into your Photoshop file. And the first is one I mentioned earlier when we were clipping out the wine glass and about having too sharp of an edge. So if we take the magnifying glass and we come in way close here to the edge of this glass and scoot just a little bit over, you can see that there is a thin white line here that's kind of separating the glass from the background. So in order to fix that, what we do is we get our selection again for our wine glass, and then on the wine glass itself, make sure you don't include the shadow layer. Apply a new layer mask, and of course that's not going to do anything yet. So we're going to double click it to go into the properties panel, and then we're going to mask the edge, and of course we're going to show it on layers, which is already enabled. Now we're just going to smooth it just a couple of pixels or a couple of points. Feather it just maybe even a fraction of a pixel and bring the edge in just a tiny bit. Let's see, a little bit more. Click OK. And now if we look at the difference, we don't have that hard edge anymore. It's subtle, but depending on the glassware, it might help the glass merge into the background a little bit better. Now there's one final step you can take to help composite your glassware in Photoshop, and that final step is to add reflections. Some glass shots will already have the reflections in place like this one, but then some, like this brandy snifter over here, won't have any reflections at all. And that's because it was probably shot using a softbox or a light tint, which helps to remove all that. But if we take that same brandy snifter and put it into our scene, all of a sudden now it looks flat and a bit lifeless. So in order to fix that, we need to add the reflections back in. And to do that, it's really simple. It's just a few steps. So we'll go ahead and hide this. The first thing we want to do is to get a vector shape, and we will just draw it right up here on top. Nice rectangular shape. And now using our point tool, we're going to add some points. Pen tool rather, to help get the shape of the reflection that we want. Now it also helps to have a reference image to look at so you can get your curvature right. Follow the shape of the glass. Now the top's really not going to matter because we're going to mask that out in a minute. So we'll get this whole thing. I'm going to try and speed up so my shape might not be perfect here. Okay, so this is our rectangle. We'll just call that front. Okay, so now that we have this, we're going to use that same trick that we did earlier. We'll duplicate this real quick to hide it. Then we'll add another layer, and we're going to put this layer filled with black. Now if you notice, the reason why I'm doing this, you notice inside of this reflection that it's more opaque in the middle, but it's got this softness before it goes to the edges. So we're going to recreate that here. And we're going to do that by adding an inner glow. Just going to multiply, get our size up higher, opacity. Yeah, that looks a little better. Okay, and we're going to use that same trick that we did earlier. We're going to merge these two layers together, then select all, Control A, Control C to copy, and paste it into a new alpha channel. Now we control click that alpha channel to make a mask. We'll make the new version of our reflection visible, and then we will make a layer mask. Now we can see we've got a nice reflection. Change the blending mode to lighten, bring down the opacity a little bit. And yes, we've lost the hard edges, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back and adjust our density to bring them back. I get it just really close to each other. There we go. That's a little bit better. Need to move this up past the lip of the glass a tad too. Okay, now that we have that, we want to go ahead and we'll store this mask in a layer real quick. We'll go ahead and convert this to a smart object so we can get some effects on it. Put our layer mask back on it, and now we're going to add a Gaussian blur. This is going to soften up the edges of the reflection just a tiny bit. Okay, it's pretty good. Now to get our back reflection, it's real simple. We're going to duplicate it, and then we're going to flip it horizontally and move it over here like so. Now this one we're going to change to overlay and bring down our opacity. Now we've got this little bit hanging up here, so we're going to take the two of them together and group them, and then we are going to drag our layer mask here to duplicate it here, which will clip off the edges. Now the shape isn't as good as earlier, I was kind of rushing, but if you look, now we have decent reflections in our whiskey glass. And there you go. Now there's one final trick I'd like to show you, and that is linking to your glassware in InDesign. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that our glassware has no background, like you can see on this version of the glass, but I've still got all the original layers intact and they're properly labeled to make it easier to figure out in InDesign what I need to see. So come back over to InDesign, and you see I've got that same red wallpaper background. Now I'm going to drag in the wine glass, adjust the size a little bit. Okay, here we go. But as you can see, the shadow might be a bit harsh and there's no real way to control it. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy by Command or Control C the wine glass, and then we're going to paste it in place, which is going to put it exactly on top of itself. And you can see it got a little bit more opaque, but that's okay. Now we're going to right click it and we're going to go to Object Layer Options, which are going to give you the layers inside of Photoshop. And you can see everything is layered, or everything is named just like it was in Photoshop. And we're going to hide the wine glass itself, so we're going to only have the shadow. We'll click OK. And now we've got this one here. And we're going to move it behind the other object. Then we're going to change the blending mode to multiply and bring down the opacity some. Now, of course, we're going to have to go and hide the shadow on the front glass. And there you go. Now Control G to group them together, and no matter where you go, your glass will sit there and work on the background. And then if we go and we export to a PDF, and there you go. See, our glass is perfectly composited into the scene, just minus a little bit of refraction. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. See you next time.